According to Transport Canada, 300 lives can be saved every year if everyone wore seatbelts. Seatbelts worn correctly can reduce the chance of death in a collision by 47% and the chances of serious injury by 52%. Wearing a seatbelt is the most effective way to save lives and reduce injuries in a collision. Uber audio seatbelt reminders are all about giving drivers and riders a cue to make sure they buckle up. Once your trip starts, you'll likely hear an audio reminder from the driver's phone asking you to please use your seatbelt for your safety. You may also receive a push notification on your phone reminding you to put your seatbelt on. No matter where you're seated in the vehicle, you always need to buckle up. Whether you're going a few blocks, a few kilometers, or a long-distance trip, your seatbelt must be worn at all times. For more information, visit audio seatbelt reminders on the Uber website, and thanks to Uber for supporting the AmberMac Show.
The AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the AmberMac Show. I'm your co-host, Jeff MacArthur. Coming up on today's episode, Amber speaks with two leading experts about some of the most important issues of our time: economic sovereignty and climate resilience. First up, as part of a brand new season of This Is Mining the podcast, here's a critical conversation about what it actually means when we say the words, Canada has what the world needs.
Made in Canada.
Canada has what the world needs. We have one of the strongest resource endowments on the planet, along with responsible mining expertise, stable institutions, and deep capital markets. But having resources in the ground is not the same as having influence. The harder question is whether Canada can turn its advantages into new mines, processing facilities, and infrastructure at the speed, scale, and seriousness the moment demands. This season, we're going to pressure test that question. My guest today is Heather Exner-Pirot, one of Canada's clearest voices on energy, natural resources, Indigenous economic participation, critical minerals, and national competitiveness. Heather is a senior fellow and director of energy, natural resources, and environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a national public policy think tank. She joins us to unpack why Canada may be entering a once-in-a-generation resource opportunity, what could prevent us from seizing it, and why simply doing well is not the same as being competitive. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Canada is in a nation-building moment. What changed and why now?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. So, I think the most obvious one is Trump being elected president, and his provocations towards Canada, jokes about annexing us, 51st state, that obviously provoked an emotional feeling in Canadians. I think kicked us out of our complacency, got a new leader, got a new government, and promoted, sovereignty and economic growth a bit more. But that's kind of the backdrop. On the mining side, in particular, there are a few things. One is that we've had these, I joke that we didn't just have a black swan event. We've had a flock of black swans. So first COVID, and then Russia invaded Ukraine, and then the Trump tariffs, and then the Strait of Hormuz closure. And that really put a lot of burden on supply chains, and also made countries really prioritize security, reliability, stability in supply chains. And obviously that makes Canada look good. In addition, you just have what I think is a normal upswing of the commodity cycle. Most people on your listening would know commodity cycles last about a generation. We've had 5 big global commodity cycles since 1900, and you usually have 10 or 15 years where you have an upswing and you have more investment, and 10 or 15 years where you have a downswing and where supply meets or exceeds demand and prices stabilize. And we obviously had the bust in 2014, and now it looks clear to me, the markets are saying that we're going into this upswing. That's always going to be an opportunity for Canada. We are a big resource exporter, and so you do see the money come back in. The TSX does well, all those kinds of things. And finally, just on top of all that, the last layer, I would say, is Chinese dominance in critical minerals. This preceded Trump. Already in the late 2010s, we were starting to think about critical minerals a bit more strategically. After Russia invaded Ukraine, it really went to the top of the priority list for governments. And so trying to regain for the Western states some kind of autonomy or some kind of redundancy in critical mineral supply chains, which China has not only come to monopolize but also weaponize. And you've seen that with a series of export restrictions that it's placed on a number of things. So all of that in combination presents really this golden opportunity for Canada as this mining nation into this cycle.
It's been interesting over the course of a few years hosting this podcast series because we have been talking for a long time about the race to unlock critical minerals and how Canada can win this race. But it does really feel that it's only been recently that beyond industry that the mainstream population is starting to understand the importance of this conversation. Can you expand a little bit on how these conversations that have been happening over the past few months within industry are now conversations that I think the average Canadian is starting to understand?
Yeah, and that I think that also goes back to, Trump, but also, maybe a resurgence of Canadian pride or desire to change things in Canada, be a bit more ambitious. And Trump has talked, I don't want to harp on Trump, but it sets the stage of the way he talked about, we have nothing that Canada or we need nothing from Canada. And talking to Zelensky about the cards that you play. I think it's become very clear in most Canadians' minds in the last year and a half that Canada does have a great set of cards. I like to say we have a full house, and it's energy and it's minerals. And in this particular cycle, in this particular geopolitical framework, those are very valuable cards. That we are not the ones to face scarcity, that we will be able to provide abundance actually to our allies, to others. And I think, there was a period, kind of between 2015 and 2024 where maybe some Canadians were embarrassed, that we are a resource exporter, that we, were confined, in a way to this primary resource extraction, shipping off raw materials, not doing the value add. That was very much the perception, I would say, in some cities. But we are excellent at resource production. It provides a huge amount of our exports. It is it's very productive work. It is very valuable work, and in a monetary sense. And I think people are starting to appreciate that we do have some strengths. I always say, there's 200 countries that wish they had the problems that Canada has, because we do have these untapped resources that we can tap into. They're still there. We still have this opportunity in front of us, and we can still, really make it work to our advantage.
If you follow Prime Minister Mark Carney, and I think it's fair to say that we both do,
Mhm.
you will see him week to week say the same thing, that Canada has what the world needs. This is a message that he has been saying for the past few months, and it's really a solid rallying cry. But can we get into what that actually requires us to do? What are those actions that need to be taken?
Yeah, so let's start with the cards that we do play, because I think it's important. We don't just have minerals, and I know it's sometimes popular for politicians to say, "Oh, we have all the critical minerals." Well, we decide what's on the critical minerals list. It may be different from some other countries, and just having a mineral in the ground in some small scale doesn't give you any kind of power, and it may not never get developed. The things that we have developed in the past and the things that we are developing now are things that will give us, the wealth and the prosperity that we're looking for. So obviously potash, uranium, metallurgical coal, gold, which is now our second biggest export behind only crude oil, iron, nickel. Those are the things that pay the bills in Canada and that create a lot of jobs and create a lot of revenues for provinces and corporate taxes for the government. So we're never going to make a ton of money off of rare earths. I'm skeptical, I would say, on things like lithium too. Those could be important for your supply chain for sure. But understanding what pays the bills and where we really are a globally significant player, I think is important, because that determines how you play your cards. And then the other thing is as Carney has gone around trying to develop more alliances, it is so clear to me what our allies are receiving us for, what they're asking us for, how they think that we can complement their economies. And that's because almost all of our allies will be resource and energy importers. And they very much want to secure their supply chains, and they very much want to have access and not face scarcity. And so it is critical minerals, it is these raw materials. That is why, Italy wants to accept, how to take that meeting, Japan, France, Germany. And so again, you were seeing how important it is for our diplomacy, for our soft power, that Canada has these. But then it gets to your point, what do we have to do to get it to our allies? And I'll point out, that of course we mine a ton of things and they're already going into global markets. And this is well established on aluminum, on nickel, on metallurgical coal, and all the things I've already mentioned. And so now we're thinking about how do you get those more niche metals, the ones that China really has developed, the ones that are causing security anxiety, that we are worried that we won't be able to feed our defense industrial base, that we will be dependent on our adversaries for things that are critical to our economies. And obviously, most of our European allies, our Japanese, South Korean allies, do not have the minerals in the ground to be able to develop from themselves. They have to get it from somewhere. Obviously, they prefer to get it from a NATO ally, and after that, a Western ally, and after that, someone who is at least not an adversary. So we'd be at the top of the list. So we have spent, in fairness, after a very rough decade for the resource extraction sector, since Trump was elected, and I think our politicians were shaken out of their complacency. Carney government has done some good things, and a lot of provincial governments have done some good things. The Building Canada Act was one. C5, people might remember it as, and creation of the Major Projects Office, but far from the very most important thing. The more important things were the series of cooperation agreements that the government signed with a number of provinces, including Ontario, to say, we accept the principle of one project, one assessment. We don't want to add redundancy, a second layer of processes, competing requirements from the federal side. We will defer to the provincial process, non-renewable resources under the provincial jurisdiction of the Constitution, accepting that we will defer to your process whenever we can. And when it is squarely in our jurisdiction with fish or reserves and those kinds of things, we will work with you. We will coordinate. And that is a very different attitude than the previous Liberal government had, where they kind of used some federal jurisdictions to interfere, I would say, in provincial jurisdiction. And now you very much have a partner. So that's been huge. And then again, provinces on their own doing some of these things. And again, confusingly in Ontario's Bill 5s, and a lot of fives out there, but also making the regulatory system more lean, more efficient, more predictable for investors. The most important thing is reducing that timeline, because time is money. And when you're talking about you're only getting projects done in 10 or 12 or 15 or 18 years, that's a lot of money on the sidelines that you could have put into tech or SpaceX or things like that. You have to compete. You have to be able to turn that money into projects in a reasonable amount of time.
Let's talk a little bit about speed, because I think we're at that point where there are a lot of people agreeing on what we need to do next. Have we actually started moving? And when we think about mining projects, what is happening in terms of enhanced processing capability? Where are we at today?
Yeah, processing, is probably a bit trickier. There is low hanging fruit, and there has been, S&P Global has come out and said, oh, in Canada, we're the fourth slowest. On average, it takes 18 years for a mine. That's not all construction. Some of this mine, development, and then you're waiting for the cycle to catch up. So almost the top thing that helps all this is commodity prices going up, because a lot of projects were just waiting for that price signal. They're in advanced stages to move to the next level. And we all know, junior miners were starving for capital basically the last 5 years. And it really feels as though in the last, 12 months, certainly, that has turned. You see that reflected in funds and indexes. And so having more money in the sector is number one. Um, Two is that, in any cycle, first you'll see kind of the mergers and the acquisitions. And you'll be seeing some of the big guys, looking to buy some of the smaller guys where they see value. They see that there's value that they're going to realize in future years and put a bet on it. And third, which is a very big opportunity in Canada, is brownfield. Not every project we are starting is being started from scratch with that 18-year timeline. There's a lot of brownfield or existing mines that could expand, or shut-in mines that could restart production. There's so much of that available in Canada that can come online pretty quickly. It's already, been permitted. Probably you already have some relationships with local communities. That is very low-hanging fruit. And that is obviously where companies are going to want to start first too, because it's the lowest cost to get back up and started. And then finally, you're going to go to those greenfields. Again, we have a pipeline of greenfield projects. It's not that everyone is at year one and has 18 years in front of them. Some of them are at year 12 or year 15 or year 17, and they're really just waiting for that last price signal, for that, last permit, and they can go ahead with that final investment decision. On processing, it's the mining side is almost the easier side for Canada because we are very good at it. That is where we excel. Processing is the one that has where we have lost capacity. The Americans have lost capacity. Europeans have lost capacity since the 80s, since China really started growing and really ramped that up in the 2000s. And China just offered, it must be said, lower environmental regulations, lower labor costs, easier permitting. Some of these things are, by Canadian standards, quite dirty or emitting, wouldn't comply with our Paris Agreement, that kind of a thing. And we just couldn't compete on cost. But it also must be said that the Chinese did develop just excellence and expertise and people with the knowledge, and these are technical things, and it's getting hard to compete with the Chinese just on those purely kind of even playing field. And so we have to rebuild that capacity. We are not starting from scratch. We obviously have great processing facilities in Sudbury, in Trail, in Quebec, the uranium, in Ontario. So we have it's not that we have no processing, but to move to another phase where we are processing more, we do need the regulation to work, and probably you're going to need some lift from the government that they will have to de-risk it or finance it somehow because it's very, very hard to compete with the Chinese at the outset on these kinds of projects.
One of the hardest tensions that exists right now is speed versus trust.
Hmm.
So we know from doing this series over the past few seasons that Canadians want to ensure that we are respecting Indigenous rights as well as environmental standards, like you mentioned. So how can we ensure that those things happen while also not delaying these projects any further?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably literally $1 trillion question, for Canada to answer, and we're trying to find the middle ground. And there's, Ontario or Canada can rationalize and make process more efficient, but the duty to consult and accommodate is in the Constitution. And you have to approach it in good faith with Indigenous nations, and you could put a timeline on it. You could say 120 days or 12 months or whatever, what have you not. If you haven't done your if the consultation takes longer than that, it just has to. Otherwise, it'll go to what we call a judicial review. So there's nothing a legislature or a parliament can do to abrogate the responsibility of that duty to consult and accommodate. And so the very best companies are the ones that will work with those nations and find ways for everyone to benefit. And that's, this is not an impossible bar. We've literally done it hundreds of times. There's literally hundreds of impact and benefit agreements with First Nations and Métis and Inuit communities across this country. So there is a path forward. I think we have a good idea of what that looks like. It's jobs, it's procurement, in some cases it's revenue. Increasingly, it's looking like equity in transmission or rail or other things where you get that long-term stable income for the community. That's an easy way for government to fund, equity, a loan guarantee for those kinds of projects. So we have a lot of tools in the toolbox to have these mutually beneficial scenarios. But at the same time, there will be some communities that are opposed. And in a lot of cases, and you see this in Ring of Fire, but you see it in a lot of, the KSM in BC, which is in the news recently, where some First Nations are on board and some First Nations are not on board. And, one of the tricky things in the duty consult is figuring out, who deserves to be accommodated the most. And usually you will have one or two nations that are very close to a mine site. And then you might have 5 or 10 or 12 that are affected by water or by the road that's being built or by some things. And they're not as impacted. Their hunting and treaty rates are not as impacted, but they still must be consulted and accommodated. And figure out how to divide up the benefits and the accommodations for that number of nations is where it often gets very tricky. And governments haven't done us much favor, frankly, by continually changing the rules and changing the bar and changing expectations, and neither have the courts. And so I hope in the coming 2 or 3 years, governments and courts can provide some certainty. It will be a very high bar. I don't think anyone expects a low bar, but that the bar stays where it is once it's established.
One of the things that we're really trying to do in this season, season 6, is to talk about what's at risk if we don't seize this opportunity and really seize this moment. What happens if Canada stays a country that has world class resources, like we've discussed, but second rate execution? What do we lose?
Yeah. So, I mean, what did we lose the last 10 years? It's not hard to figure out what the costs are. RBC said we lost $1 trillion of investment. Obviously, that wasn't all mining, but some of it was mining. But it's very much the sense that Canada is not as a desirable attraction or a jurisdiction for investment, that this is not a place where you want to be putting your money. And Carney, to his credit, has changed that narrative. And the commodity cycle has helped a lot with that as well, where investors and other countries are looking at Canada. They are giving it a second glance. They are curious. Have things changed? Is this place investable? And not every country gets a second chance like that. We are getting that second chance, but it is time bound. That if it does turn out in 6 months and say, nah, it's same old Canada, same problems that we had the last 10 years. Don't waste your time there. Go to Argentina or Kazakhstan or Arizona or Lapland or something like that, Western Australia. So we absolutely need to prove now to the world that we can build. And I think, when I look at our Minister of Energy and Minister, Lecce, Hodgson, Carney, Ford, all singing from the same songbook, but the boardrooms don't, that's helpful for boardrooms to make an FID, but it's absolutely not enough, and so going through that permitting process, having that certainty, that resilience in your decisions, improving, the permitting, all those things really matter. And at the end of the day, did you get this project done on time, on budget? Was there infrastructure? Was there tax competitiveness? At the end of the day, those things matter. So we've made a great start. We have given ourselves the second opportunity, and I commend our governments for that. But it's still show me time, and so people are still waiting.
I hate to ask you to look into a crystal ball and predict the future, because I think it's fair to say that none of us are capable of doing exactly that. But at this moment in time, if you look 10 years out, are we going to look back and see that Canada has really seized this moment or missed this moment? What is your feeling right now?
Yeah, I am feeling optimistic. But where I get concerned, I'm optimistic because I think there's no way for us not to do well in Canada in a global commodity upswing, in which reliability and stability have a premium. Like, this is like, we will do well. Even just the products that we produce today will just be assigned better value, and we'll do, like gold. We're doing well off of gold without having, before we even changed anything really. That's where I get concerned, that people will look and say, hey, things are good. What are you complaining about? You're making profits, you're getting revenues, what more could you want? And for me, it's very careful to say, like, what are we achieving and what could we achieve? And to have some ambition in this moment. And the prize of having ambition and executing is tremendous. Again, for me, concretely, the final investment decisions, the revenues, the taxes, the jobs. Obviously, those are important. The more revenues, the more jobs, high paying jobs you have, the better. But also, the chance to grow global market share. And I always think that is a good measure, because you can grow, but if the whole world is growing at 10% faster than you were losing market share. Your growth was not about competitiveness. It was about, you're just in the race. If we can grow global market share in some key commodities in this commodity cycle, that will be the indicator that we're actually competitive. That actually we are growing faster than our competitors. The money wants to come here, and we are executing on it. And the prize of all that, again, aside from the economic aspects I just mentioned, are the political ones. That, first of all, it does help be a foundation for some alliances. And Canada's obviously in a position where we're looking for some new friends, and also looking for some of our old friends to appreciate what we have, and to not take the relationship for granted. Critical minerals can be a big way to do that. Just today, or recently with the G7, Italy signing on to develop critical mineral stockpile of Canada. That is how you develop alliances. And in the long run, you always need alliances. You always need more friends. They come in handy in other ways. And then finally, being that provider, when we say Canada has what the world needs, the world does need this stuff. And if Canada is not producing, if there isn't a provider like us, large provider, stable provider, getting into the market in a reliable, affordable way, materials will just be more expensive. If we don't put in more copper, if we don't put in more iron, more metallurgical coal, more potash, more uranium, energy will be more expensive, building will be more expensive, food will be more expensive. That is a fact. And so anything that we can get into the market in this reliable, ethical, responsible way that obviously benefits us is also very good for those other 8.5 billion people in the world that want to have material well-being. And I do expect that we will go into a period that is more inflationary, where you do have more scarcity, where prices do go up for a lot of essential goods. And Canada can help minimize or reduce those harmful impacts. And I honestly believe we have a moral obligation to do this, that the more we put into the market, the better everyone else will be.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, you are optimistic about the next 10 years, but we got to move quickly and efficiently.
And be ambitious. For once, let's be a little bit ambitious in this country. Let's not just accept good as good enough. Let's say, what could we really accomplish here with this opportunity in a tray on our laps? What could we really accomplish here as a country?
Well, listen, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this season. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Heather reminds us that Canada's opportunity is not simply to benefit from a commodity boom, but to prove we can turn our resources into new projects, prosperity, and global influence. Her view is that we have a moral obligation to produce more. Because when we fail to bring materials like copper, uranium, and potash to market, energy, food, and infrastructure become more expensive for people around the world. Canada has been given a second chance. Now, as Heather put it, it is show me time, and good enough is no longer good enough. Follow This Is Mining on Instagram for more stories and resources. And in our next episode, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor Jody Thomas will explain why Canada can no longer take our sovereignty or our security for granted. She'll make the case that critical minerals are not simply commercial assets, but strategic infrastructure that we must be prepared to invest in when the market alone cannot protect Canada's interests. This Is Mining, the podcast is brought to you by AmberMac Media in partnership with the Ontario Mining Association and Employment Ontario, funded by the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario, with thanks to our season sponsor, Mine Connect.
Thanks, Heather and Amber. Coming up next, everything you need to know about how electric vehicles work and how this technology just keeps on getting better and better.
The AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Over the past few months, more and more Canadians are turning to electric vehicles when buying cars. In fact, according to a new report released this summer by Clutch, as gas prices continue to rise, Canadians are buying used EVs at the fastest pace ever. To share more about EVs, here's a look back at a conversation Amber hosted with Rachel Doran, the Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada, on why 2026 should be a comeback year for EVs.
Talking Tech.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to chat.
When I talk about electric vehicles online, it is one of the most controversial topics. It shouldn't be that way. I think we should focus on a lot of the facts when it comes to EVs, especially here in Canada. So I was excited to see the report that you recently co-authored. Let's start there. What did you discover throughout that report that really speaks to the time that we're in this moment?
Yeah, so as you say, electric vehicles, there's a lot of views about them out there. But one of the things that we like to study, and we've done this study a few times, is how much money do they save compared to running a car off of traditional gasoline? And so what we did was release a report last week looking at kind of comparable cars, so an SUV versus an SUV over a 10-year lifespan of a vehicle, including maintenance, gas, purchase price up front. What do you save? And we were expecting the numbers to be pretty good this time because we just had the federal government reintroduce a $5,000 rebate that applies to a lot of new vehicles this year. And the numbers are quite good, Amber. So this is based on 2025 prices. It doesn't even count the kind of skyrocketing price of gas in the last month. But based on the last year, people could save between $23,000 and $32,000 over 10 years. Like that is thousands of dollars a year if you amortize it over time, and it's going to make a huge difference in people's pocketbooks.
It's a significant amount of money, especially at a time when Canadians are really struggling to make ends meet. And I think in many ways, when we think about these energy solutions that are focused more on green or clean solutions, not only are they better for the environment, but they're also better at the end of the day in terms of our wallets and how much that we can save. When you look at the numbers here in Canada, what are you seeing in the report in terms of the number of people who are buying EVs? Because I have seen so much information over the past few months that tells a bunch of different stories on that front.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to answer the question. One is what's been happening in Canada in the past year. And we've noted, it went down. We were actually one of the only countries in the world where EV sales declined last year. But we pointed out like that was due to a number of different factors. We had a rebate that wasn't canceled, it was just paused. So lots of people might have been waiting if they were interested in an EV to see if it would come back. We had our kind of standard that was encouraging automakers to make more models available paused. We were one of the only countries in the world, including the US, that had 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, which have been fueling some of that lower budget end electric vehicles in other countries. So through a combination of different things going on, like the Canadian market was really slow last year. That said, out there in the world, 1 in 4 new vehicles sold in 2025 was electric around the world. And we can dig in a bit to what counts as an electric car, but that's huge. And in Canada, we were down closer to 9%. But we are already seeing kind of a big turnaround. I think there was just the online retailer Clutch releases their numbers about just what are people looking at online. And they said between January and March, in some of these new announcements and the new gas prices, the interest in electric vehicles on their site went up 95%. So we don't have all the new sales numbers that'll reflect what's been going on in the past couple of months, but that interest difference is already huge. And I think because, maybe 5 years ago, the only people who wanted electric vehicles were ones who were interested in it for, climate or clean reasons. Now people are starting to really be aware of that cost saving benefit. So an entirely different demographic of people are looking at these as a solution for their lives.
I wanted to touch back on something you just said in terms of what constitutes an electric vehicle, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I've been saying what saves you the most money, I'm talking about a battery electric vehicle. So that's one that you plug in. The only way that you're getting your power is through a plug. And so you can do that in your home, in your garage, even just with a regular outlet, but it's pretty slow, or you can do it on the highway with a fast charger. But there's also electric vehicles on the market called plug-in hybrids. And those ones have a battery, but they're intended to kind of do your daily commute. So, maybe you can commute up to 80 kilometers on your battery, and then it flips over to a fossil fuel powered vehicle where you still have, gas in the tank. The third kind that people might have heard of is more of a conventional hybrid. It still runs off of gasoline, but it has some extra efficiency in the powertrain that comes from being electric. So our report looked at all of these because a consumer might reasonably say, well, I don't know, what do I want? And maybe I want the benefit of something that feels a bit more familiar to me. But we really found the savings come from electricity is just cheaper than gas. And I mean, everyone who's paying up to $2 a gas tank, a liter these days is really feeling that. And so, we compared the Toyota RAV4 across all these different kinds of models I just described. And the electric model saved $26,000 over 10 years. That plug-in hybrid model, if you're remembering to plug it in most of the time, you got savings between $9,600 and $12,000. So still good, but the rebates, tend to be a bit lower, and just that cost savings, you're still relying on gas some of the time. So it's not as as much of savings. And the RAV4 conventional hybrid only saved you about $6,000. So kind of like the further you can get from gas, the more money you're going to save based on our study.
I wanted to ask you how this differs across the country in terms of different provinces and territories. And I know this is purely anecdotal, but I just got off the phone with my mother who lives in Prince Edward Island, and I'm trying to get her to get an EV for her next car, or at least a hybrid. And she was saying, but electricity costs are so high right now in Prince Edward Island. So I'm just going to leave you with all of that. Can you unpack that for us in terms of the savings across the entire country?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I will say our report looked at electric vehicles. We also looked at what would it take to electrify your whole house. And so I can get into that a little bit more if it's of interest. And the savings definitely vary across the country. But one thing that, again, maybe come as a surprise to people is there was savings on the electric side in every province of the country, like over time. And maybe I can start by explaining a little bit of that, and as an electric car driver, maybe I can make it more tangible. So, you go to the gas station, depending on the size of your car, these days, maybe you're spending like $100, maybe you're spending $70. Like plugging in a car, 80% of people who drive an electric car these days are plugging in their garage 80% of the time. Like they have a dedicated parking spot. So they're just paying that kind of like regular electricity rate, which in some provinces is even lower overnight. So in a place like Ontario, if you plug in overnight, you're getting the benefit of an even cheaper rate for your electricity, which isn't available in all provinces. So our study kind of assumed regular charging habits. We're going to do a lot of this at home on your own bill, and sometimes you'll be out using those public charging networks. But so for your mom in Prince Edward Island, we found a savings kind of every month just on the car of up to $448.
Wow, that is significant. Now, again, I think if we just trace this back to the purchase of an electric vehicle, some people may say, well, the upfront costs are so high. You mentioned a little bit in terms of some of the federal government incentives and a new rebate or an unpaused rebate that exists. Could you walk us through that just so people understand what is available to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in early February, the federal government just released their new auto strategy. And one of the things they announced was an electric vehicle rebate that would apply to cars under $50,000 that come from countries with a free trade agreement. So I'll just say it's not China, but everywhere else. So all the other cars that are under $50,000, you get a $5,000 rebate this year. So I will say, Amber, it's going to decline every year. So it's one reason why people might want to, if they've been thinking about it, go out and see what's available on the lot sooner rather than later. And so this is available to new cars. And one of the good things about the rebate is that people don't actually have to, says it's a rebate, but it's like right off the purchase price. Like the dealerships just manage kind of the rebate program. And so you just kind of go to the dealership and they deduct that off of a purchase price. So that's one of the things that's kind of driving savings down. But out of interest, I think it's maybe why there's so much kind of excitement and enthusiasm being sparked about electric vehicles in Canada right now. If you were going to go shopping in January for a Chevy Equinox EV, and you use those gas prices, and at the time there was no rebate, you would have saved $22,000 over 10 years. If you, just for a thought experiment, assume gas prices stayed as high as they are, as of mid-March, plus that $5,000 rebate, all of a sudden you'd be saving $34,000 over the course of the vehicle. So that's like $12,000 difference in savings just by that increased gas price and the addition of that rebate up front. And I think another thing that's kind of good to watch is we really noticed last fall, Canada was missing cars under $40,000. And when you ask people what they're, not everybody can buy a new car. Some people need to shop on the used market. And even those who can buy a new car, like that under $40,000 price bracket's pretty important for people who are shopping more on the affordable end of things. And at the time last fall, there was only one. But we've already seen a couple of different automakers drop their prices to just come right in under that $50,000 mark so that their vehicles will qualify for the rebate. So that all of a sudden would come down to $45,000. So again, I think as people have to start thinking about what would it mean for my life to switch to electric, there's probably going to be a bit of my car payment might be a bit higher, but all of a sudden my gas bills are, so much lower because I'm plugging in through electricity that doing the math all together as a bit of a full wallet is maybe helpful for people to think about like how this is going to actually benefit their monthly bills.
I think that's the one of the most important things that you've said so far is to actually do the math, because for some people who are driving a lot, especially in this moment in time when gas prices are skyrocketing, and if you really think about how much you're spending per month, like you said, I mean, for many people it's in the hundreds and hundreds of dollars as far as the gas prices. So if you were to get a new EV and potentially lease it and get the rebate. I mean, all of a sudden, once you do the math, I mean, it probably makes sense for a whole lot of people. What do you find is holding people back the most?
Well, I mean, the market is changing really fast. So, one thing is, if you were shopping for an electric vehicle or thought about it 5 years, again, this is a totally different group of people. The charging network was not as good. The prices were different. The speeds and ranges that, cars are going to go have changed over time. So it's, what's available out there on the market today might surprise people. So maybe that's one of the things, Amber, is, in these fast moving technologies, it's worth taking another look, because these days cars go over 400 kilometers at a charge. Canada's charging network publicly is growing every year. And as I said, even just in the past couple months, there's been some differences in what we're finding out there on the market and the price points. I think, again, this is a technology that's new. So when we did a study last year of people in the greater Metro Toronto area, including Hamilton, Brampton, et cetera, greater Vancouver area, what we found was, about half of those people were kind of open to buying an EV as their next vehicle. And as soon as they knew one other person that owned one, it went up to 70%. So it's then you have somebody to ask, how's the charging network going to work? And what's the app that I use? And do you have any problems ever finding, charging? So I think the more we see people kind of buying these and you can talk to your friends and neighbors about it, the more it's going to feel like a technology that feels kind of manageable and interesting for someone who might have been thinking about it, but not quite ready. And I will say, Amber, that one thing I didn't mention that we did with our report this time is we actually have an interactive calculator online to really help people who are thinking about making the switch start seeing in their particular situation how much money might they be able to save, and then some links to what are the rebates available in your province, because some provinces even have an extra rebate on top of the federal one, and just anything at some facts about what electric vehicles are available on the market today. So it's mycleanbill.ca if anyone wants to go and just get really connected to just some things to spark your imagination about whether this makes sense for you.
And I would really strongly encourage people to do just that, because I think if you go off on your own, you start to do some research, or you start to talk to your friends or your neighbors, and they don't know a lot about EVs, they may unfortunately be spreading some of the myths that exist about EVs, which are plenty. I hate even to bring some of them up because I don't want to talk about the misinformation and disinformation, but it does exist, especially in a country like Canada, because I know even when I speak about EVs on social media, sometimes people will say to me, oh, well, they don't work in colder climates. And just to echo some of your comments already, when it comes to how technology is improving and developing, there are lots of examples of cold countries where almost entire populations are buying EVs. So I certainly don't think that's an argument anymore. But I do have to ask you that question in terms of our climate here in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Norway is the example that always gets used. It's pretty comparable to Canada in terms of its climate from north to south. And yeah, they are selling almost entirely electric vehicles these days, above 95%. And so clearly, I think climate is not at all an issue for some of the batteries that we're seeing these days. And one of the things that has changed again over time is there's now what's called a heat pump installed in a lot of electric vehicles that help keep the battery temperature higher. And so you don't even kind of lose as much charge as people might have heard a couple years ago in colder temperatures. Technology is changing a lot. And I agree with you, Amber. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there. So it's maybe good, instead of repeating some of the facts that are inaccurate, I'm also happy to kind of walk through a couple of things we hear a lot as concerns. And maybe, it's useful to just know, if you're in the market, some of the evidence behind it.
I would love to walk through some of that because I do think people are hungry for information. I think they do want the facts, but it's hard to know where to actually go. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those realities in terms of EVs.
Yeah. So I think a fear that we hear is around the battery. So like an electric vehicle, one of the great things about it is you're going to have less maintenance because there are fewer moving parts. So you don't need an oil change. There's no oil. But it does have that one big battery that's like one of the more valuable parts of the electric vehicle. So I think there's some hesitancy around like, how long will my battery last? What if I need to replace it? And so a good thing to know is batteries in Canada tend to be warrantied for up to 160,000 kilometers or 8 years. So that's the majority of the driving we're talking about through this 10-year period where like the main thing that can go wrong with your car is under warranty. So that's maybe one thing that I think we hear a lot. I mean, I know we talked about it at the beginning, and not everybody is buying electric vehicles these days because, they want it for environmental reasons, but it is good to know it's cleaner, no matter where your car was produced, no matter what your battery was produced with, and no matter like the state of the electricity grid you plug it into. Electric cars are just more efficient. Like in order to get power out of a gas powered car, you're kind of like, you burn the fuel heats something, that moves something. And so you just lose a lot of stuff in translation. Whereas the electric powered, it's like straight from the electricity to the wheels and it just powers it. So it's always more efficient. And so it's always going to be better kind of for anyone who is worried about the climate side and the kind of like clean side. Electric vehicles tick.
Yeah, and I think another thing too that we haven't really talked that much about, but if we think about the geopolitical situation in the world right now, what we've seen over the past few weeks is this fluctuation in terms of gas prices, mostly rising higher. We just had news recently in terms of some airlines in the U.S. who say they only have about 6 weeks of runway, no pun intended, when it comes to powering their planes with gas. So I think what we're seeing is that this moment in time, at least from my perspective, is probably going to become more of the norm in the future instead of just kind of a blip. What do you think about that piece?
Well, I think you're totally right, Amber, that we're just in this real time having to deal with this reality that fossil fuel prices are set internationally and therefore they're subject to things that are sort of out of Canadian control. Even though we produce oil and gas, it's not really helping us at the pump these days. So, we put in our report a bit of a graphic of what has happened to fossil fuel prices over the last 10 years. And that looks like a roller coaster. It's up and down and up and down. And clearly like we're in an upswing right now with some very serious consequences on people's lives and, people who are already struggling to kind of pay their bills month by month. Having this real surprise hit on the gas side is obviously like, it's really causing real consequences for people who have to make choices about what else they can sacrifice. The electricity graph, though, is because we're producing our electricity domestically. Like we buy a little bit and sell a little bit across the border north-south to the US historically. But mostly if you live in a province, a lot of your electricity is being produced in that province. So it's been a lot more controlled over time. If you look at the graph on electricity over the last 10 years, no matter where you're looking, whether it's Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, it still looks a lot flatter than the prices of gas. So it's not an exact comparison, but I've been telling people like it's a little bit like if you pick a fixed rate mortgage or you fix a variable mortgage, like all of a sudden you don't know what your monthly payments are going to be next month. And so I think you're totally right, Amber. This is this moment where this really translates in a very real way into people's lives and into their budgets. And I think they're seeing the real advantage of having that more like fixed and steady and domestically produced energy powering their everyday transportation.
What have you been hearing from people since you released this report? I know it's only been a few days, but what is the reaction to the report and some of the data within it?
I think, as I said, we've done this kind of calculation before, but there's a real energy around it this time, I think, just for all the reasons that we're talking about. I think people do have a real appetite and are seeing that electric vehicles sudden, like auto shows around the world are showcasing electric vehicles because they're also kind of cool. And so, this combination of a lot of where the technology has been going and where the innovation has been going, and now where the cost savings are headed, has just sparked a real enthusiasm and appetite from people who want to learn. And maybe not everybody's in the market to buy tomorrow, but I will say, with stuff like rebates, what that can do over time is also spark more movement in the used market. So maybe if you're not able to think about a car purchase today, even if someone is like incentivized to change over their older electric vehicle sooner, that might put another one out on the market earlier. And there's already a good number of electric vehicles on the used market in Canada. Depending on your needs, like a household that drives 2 vehicles, maybe one, it makes tons of sense to get one of those older electric vehicles with smaller range to do your daily commute on, while you keep, your traditional car for a longer road trip or something. So I think it's really sparking people to think about, how could I incorporate this in my life, and really see in real time. It isn't just a clean energy think tank saying this, I see how this can benefit, my day and my life.
Thanks, Rachel and Amber. That full conversation is now available over on YouTube. That's all for today's episode, but we wanted to share a few ways that you can keep in touch with Amber and me in the months ahead. For starters, we're posting all of our segments from the show over on youtube.com/AmberMac. Our subscriber numbers are growing, but we could also still use your help, so please subscribe there, hit the like button, and leave a comment on any videos that interest you. Thanks so much for your support. You'll also find us on all of the major social media platforms, so we invite you to reach out there at AmberMac or at Jeff MacArthur and let us know what you think of the show or any specific segments, and we may even feature what you say on a future episode. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you all next week.
Hey, I'm Amber Mac, and every time I do a keynote speech, I get asked the same question over and over again. How do you keep up with all things tech? What's happening in artificial intelligence and beyond? Well, every Tuesday, I send out a free email newsletter. Each week, I talk about the latest news in AI, technology, sustainability, and beyond. This is an opportunity to stay on top of all things tech for free. All you have to do is sign up at ambermac.com/newsletter.
You're listening to The AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.